Mira didn't know that the man watching her scrub the throne room floors was the most powerful alpha in the realm. She didn't know that his wolf had been prowling restlessly for weeks, searching for something he couldn't name. And she certainly didn't know that when the royal guards burst through the servants' quarters that morning, they would drag her straight into a destiny she never imagined possible. She had been invisible for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. 3 years of scrubbing floors, emptying chamber pots, and sleeping on a straw pallet in the basement had taught her that keeping her head down meant staying safe. When the other servants whispered about the Alpha King's upcoming selection ceremony, where he would choose his queen from the finest noble daughters in the kingdom, Mira felt nothing but relief that such things had nothing to do with someone like her. The stone floors of the castle were cold beneath her knees, the rough brush wearing her hands raw as she worked. Dawn light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble she'd been cleaning since before sunrise. The selection ceremony would begin soon, and every surface had to be perfect for the hundreds of noble families arriving to present their daughters. She was nobody, she knew that. The daughter of a servant who died when Mira was 14, leaving her with nothing but debt and the clothes on her back. The castle steward had been clear about her position when he'd taken her in. Work hard, stay quiet, and be grateful for a roof over her head. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridors, growing closer. Mira didn't look up from her scrubbing. Guard rotations happened constantly during important events, and she'd learned long ago that acknowledging their presence only invited unwanted attention. "That's her!" The voice was rough, impatient. "The one with the dark hair." Mira's hand stilled on the brush. Something cold settled in her stomach as the footsteps stopped directly behind her. "You, girl, stand up." She turned slowly, still on her knees, to find 3 royal guards in full ceremonial armour staring down at her. The gold wolf crest on their chest plates gleamed in the morning light. These weren't ordinary guards. These were the Alpha King's personal protection. "I think there's been some mistake," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast space. "I'm just—" "Lady Mira of House Blackthorn," the lead guard read from a scroll, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "By order of His Majesty, you are summoned to the selection ceremony." Her heart stopped. "No, I'm not Lady anything. I'm a servant. There's been a mistake." But strong hands were already pulling her to her feet, and she realised with growing horror that they weren't listening. Her wet, stained dress clung to her legs, and her hair hung in tangled strands around her face. She looked exactly like what she was, a servant girl who'd been scrubbing floors since dawn. "Please," she tried again as they marched her through corridors she'd only ever cleaned, past tapestries and portraits of nobles whose names she didn't even know. "You have the wrong person. Lady Blackthorn must be someone else. I don't even have a last name." The throne room doors loomed ahead, massive oak panels carved with running wolves. She could hear the murmur of hundreds of voices beyond them, the rustle of silk gowns, and the soft laughter of well-born ladies. Her stomach lurched, the doors swung open, every conversation stopped, hundreds of faces turned toward her, and Mira wanted nothing more than to disappear into the floor she'd been scrubbing an hour ago. Noble daughters in their finest gowns, their hair arranged in elaborate styles, their jewels catching the light from crystal chandeliers. And there she stood in her brown servant's dress, damp and stained, her hands still red from the harsh soap. But it was the figure on the throne that stole her breath entirely. Alpha King Kieran was nothing like the distant cold ruler she'd imagined from servants' gossip. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair that caught the light and shoulders that filled his black jacket like he'd been born to command. But it was his eyes that held her frozen in place, golden amber, like liquid fire, and they were staring directly at her with an intensity that made her skin burn. The moment their gazes met, something impossible happened. Heat exploded through her chest, radiating outward like she'd swallowed lightning. It was warm and electric and terrifying, a sensation she'd never felt before but somehow recognised in her bones. Her breath caught, and she saw his eyes widen slightly, as if he felt it too. The golden thread. The servants whispered about it sometimes, late at night when they thought no one was listening. The bond between true mates that could never be broken, never be denied. But that was impossible. She was nobody. "Your Majesty," one of the guards said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Lady Mira of House Blackthorn, as requested." A ripple of whispers spread through the assembled crowd. She caught fragments of their shock. Servant's dress? How inappropriate. Surely there's been an error. Lady Cassandra, resplendent in emerald silk, stepped forward with a cruel smile. "Your Majesty, I believe your guards have made a terrible mistake. This is clearly a servant who has wandered into the wrong room." Heat flooded Mira's cheeks. She wanted to agree, to beg them to let her return to her scrubbing and her invisibility. But the king's golden eyes never left her face. "Is there a mistake?" His voice was deep, commanding, and it seemed to resonate in her very bones. He spoke to the room, but his gaze remained locked on hers. "Yes," she whispered, barely able to form the words. "I'm nobody, Your Majesty. I don't belong here. I'm just a servant." He rose from his throne then, a fluid movement that reminded her he was more than just a king. He was a predator, an alpha wolf in human form, and every instinct she possessed told her she should run. Instead, she stayed frozen as he descended the steps, each footfall echoing in the absolute silence. The crowd of noble daughters parted before him like he was cutting through water, but his eyes never wavered from hers. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could smell his scent, pine and leather and something wild that made her wolf blood sing. Wait, wolf blood? She'd never had wolf blood. Her mother had been human, hadn't she? "You say you're nobody," he said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the massive room. "But when I look at you, I see everything I've been searching for." A collective gasp rose from the assembled nobles. Mira's knees nearly buckled. "There has been no mistake," he continued, his golden gaze burning into hers. "Guards, escort the other ladies home. The selection is over." The throne room erupted. Voices raised in shock and protest, noble families demanding explanations. But through it all, Mira stood transfixed by the impossible man before her, the one who had just dismissed every eligible woman in the kingdom. For her, a nobody in a servant's dress who didn't even understand what was happening. "What's your name?" he asked gently, as if they were alone instead of surrounded by chaos. "Mira," she managed, "just Mira." "Well then, just Mira," he said, and she caught the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Welcome home." The chambers they gave her were larger than the entire servants' quarters where she'd slept for 3 years. Silk curtains hung from windows that overlooked gardens she'd only ever seen from a distance while emptying slop buckets. A 4-poster bed dominated the room, draped in midnight blue velvet that probably cost more than most servants earned in a lifetime. Mira stood in the centre of it all, still wearing her stained brown dress, feeling like an intruder in a life that couldn't possibly be hers. A soft knock interrupted her spiralling thoughts. Before she could respond, the door opened, and he walked in. Alpha King Kieran, moving with that predator's grace that made her pulse race against her will. He carried a silver tray, steam rising from covered dishes that filled the room with scents that made her empty stomach clench. "You haven't changed," he observed, setting the tray on the small table by the fireplace. His golden eyes took in her servant's dress without judgment, but she felt exposed nonetheless. "These aren't my clothes," she said quietly, gesturing to the elaborate gowns hanging in the wardrobe that servants had filled while she stood frozen in shock. "I wouldn't know how to wear them properly." "Then don't." He moved to the fireplace, adding logs with practised ease. The flames caught and danced, casting warm light across his face. "Wear whatever makes you comfortable." But nothing about this made her comfortable. The golden thread sensation hadn't faded since that moment in the throne room. If anything, it had grown stronger, a constant warmth humming beneath her skin that intensified whenever he was near. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. "Why me? I saw those women. They were beautiful, educated, worthy of a king. I'm nobody." He turned from the fire, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "You keep saying that word. Nobody. Do you know what I am, Mira?" "A king," she whispered. "Yes, but more than that." He moved closer, and she caught that wild scent again, pine and leather, and something that called to a part of her she didn't understand. "I'm an alpha wolf shifter, the most dominant of my kind. My wolf has been restless for months, searching, hunting for something I couldn't identify." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Wolf shifter?" "The moment I saw you, he went completely still. For the first time in my life, my wolf was at peace." He stopped 3 feet away, the same distance he'd maintained in the throne room. "That golden warmth you felt when our eyes met? That was the mating bond recognizing its other half." "That's impossible." But even as she said it, her hand moved unconsciously to her chest, where the warmth pulsed strongest. "Is it?" He tilted his head, studying her with an expression that was both predatory and gentle. "Tell me about your mother, Mira." The question hit like a physical blow. "She's dead." "I'm sorry." His voice softened. "But what do you remember about her?" Mira wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "She was human, a servant like me. She died when I was 14, and the steward said I could work off her debts." "Human," he repeated thoughtfully. "Are you certain?" "Of course I'm certain. I would know if—" She stopped, memories flooding back unbidden. Her mother's strange habits, how she always seemed to know when storms were coming, how she could calm any frightened animal with just a touch. The way she'd insisted they avoid the castle during full moons, claiming the servants needed extra rest. "She made me promise to never tell anyone about the dreams," Mira whispered, the words pulled from some buried place in her memory. "Dreams of running through forests on 4 legs, of hunting under moonlight. She said they were just nightmares, that I should forget them." "Half-blood," he said gently. "Your mother was protecting you. In some kingdoms, half-blood shifters are killed at birth. She hid what you were to keep you safe." The golden warmth pulsed stronger, as if responding to the revelation. Everything suddenly made sense. The restlessness she'd always felt, the way she seemed to sense things before they happened, the inexplicable pull she'd felt toward the forests beyond the castle walls. "I'm a wolf," she breathed. "Part of one," he confirmed, "and that's why you can feel the mating bond, why your soul recognized mine the moment we looked at each other." She sank into the chair by the fireplace, overwhelmed. "This is too much. I can't be your mate. I don't know how to be anything other than a servant." "Then start there." He settled into the chair across from her, careful to maintain distance. "Tell me about your life, your dreams, what you want that has nothing to do with kingdoms or thrones." For a moment she just stared at him. When was the last time anyone had asked her what she wanted? "I wanted to learn to read," she said finally. "My mother taught me some letters before she died, but servants aren't supposed to have books." "What else?" "I wanted a garden." The admission felt strange on her tongue. "Somewhere I could grow things instead of just cleaning up after other people. Maybe have a little cottage with windows that actually opened." "Those sound like beautiful dreams." She looked up at him sharply. "Don't mock me." "I'm not." His voice was steady, sincere. "I'm trying to understand the woman my soul chose." Before she could respond, rapid footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. A guard burst through the door without ceremony, his face grim. "Your Majesty, urgent news from the northern borders." Kieran's entire demeanour shifted, the gentle man across from her transforming into the commanding Alpha King. "Speak." "Scouts report movement from the Shadowfang pack. They're massing near the border, and there are rumours they plan to strike during what should have been your mating celebration." Something cold settled in Mira's stomach. Because of me? The guard's eyes flicked to her uncertainly. The disruption of the selection ceremony has created political complications, Your Majesty. Some of the rejected noble houses are not pleased. Let me guess, Kieran said, his voice deadly quiet. Lady Cassandra's family among them? House Ravencrest has sent word that they question the appropriateness of your choice. Mira felt the familiar shame rising, the voice in her head that whispered she was indeed nobody, that she would ruin everything by simply existing. But before the thoughts could take hold, warm fingers touched her chin, tilting her face up. "Look at me," Kieran commanded softly. "This is not your fault. Political games and ambitious families are nothing new. The only thing that's changed is that they can no longer use marriage as a weapon against the crown. But people will die because you chose me instead of... People will die if I allow others to dictate who I take as my mate." His thumb brushed across her cheek, and she realized she was trembling. "I've spent years fighting to unite these territories under one crown. I won't let anyone, noble house or enemy pack, decide my personal choices." The guard cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Your Majesty, there's more. The Shadowfang Alpha has specifically requested information about your chosen mate. They seem very interested in any potential weaknesses." The golden warmth in Mira's chest turned to ice. She was a weakness. A servant girl with no training, no protection, no idea how to defend herself or anyone else. "Then we'll give them nothing," Kieran said firmly. "Double the guard rotations. Send word to our allied packs that we may need support, and prepare the castle's defences." "Yes, Your Majesty." The guard bowed and disappeared as quickly as he'd come. Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken fears. Mira stared into the fire, watching flames dance like the chaos her presence had unleashed. "I should go," she whispered, "back to the servants' quarters. If I'm not here, there's no reason for anyone to attack." "Mira." His voice was patient but implacable. "Do you know what happened to my first mate?" She shook her head. "I lost her to raiders when I was 25. I thought the bond would never come again, that I was meant to rule alone." His golden eyes found hers across the firelight. "I've spent 8 years believing my wolf would never find peace. When I looked at you today, everything changed." "But I'm not strong enough for this," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "I don't know how to be what you need." "I don't need a perfect queen," he said quietly. "I need my mate, the woman who makes my wolf calm and my soul complete. Everything else we can figure out together." "What if I can't?" "Then I'll wait." He leaned back in his chair, but his eyes never left her face. "However long you need, I'll wait, but I won't let you run from this because you're afraid. The bond doesn't lie, Mira. What we felt in that throne room was real." She wanted to argue, to insist that this was all a mistake that would end in disaster. But the golden warmth in her chest pulsed steady and sure, a truth her soul recognized even when her mind rebelled. "I don't know how to be anything other than afraid," she admitted. "Then start there too," he said gently. "We'll figure it out together." The days that followed were a strange rhythm of resistance and surrender. Each morning, Kieran appeared at her door with breakfast and that patient smile that undid her defences piece by piece. Each evening, she told herself tomorrow she would ask to return to the servants' quarters where she belonged. But she never did. Instead, she found herself walking through gardens that had once been forbidden territory, sitting in the library while he taught her to read the ancient texts of wolf lore, listening to his voice as he explained the delicate politics of ruling a kingdom where humans and shifters coexisted in uneasy peace. "Your handwriting is improving," he observed on the third morning, watching as she carefully copied passages about pack hierarchies. They sat at the small table in her chambers. Autumn sunlight streaming through windows she still couldn't believe were hers. "My mother would have been proud," she said softly, then immediately regretted the words. She didn't want his pity for her humble beginnings, but he didn't offer pity. Instead, he reached across the table and covered her ink-stained fingers with his own. "Tell me about her. What was she like?" The golden warmth flared at his touch, and Mira had to fight the urge to pull away. 3 days of this careful courtship, and she still felt overwhelmed by the intensity of the bond. "She was kind," she said finally, "too kind for her own good. She used to give away half our food to families who had even less than we did. She sounds like someone I would have respected. She cleaned these very chambers, you know." Mira gestured around the room. "When the previous queen was alive, she used to tell me stories about the beautiful dresses and the elegant parties, but she never sounded bitter about not being part of that world." "And you? Do you sound bitter?" She considered the question seriously. "I sound terrified. There's a difference." His thumb traced across her knuckles, and she shivered. "What terrifies you most?" "That I'll wake up tomorrow and this will all have been a dream, that you'll realize you made a mistake and send me back to scrubbing floors." The admission escaped before she could stop it. "Mira." His voice was gentle but firm. "Look at me." She met his golden eyes reluctantly. "I am not going to change my mind. My wolf doesn't make mistakes about these things. Neither do I." Before she could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. A servant entered, curtsying nervously. "Your Majesty, Lord Chancellor Aldrich requests your immediate presence in the council chambers. He says it concerns the evening's dinner arrangements." Kieran's expression darkened slightly. "Tell the Chancellor I'll be there shortly." When they were alone again, he turned back to her. "Tonight is the formal dinner to introduce you to the noble houses. Are you ready?" Ready? She would never be ready to face the people who had witnessed her humiliation in the throne room, who whispered about the servant girl who thought she could be queen. "Do I have a choice?" she asked. "Always," he said simply, "but hiding won't make them accept you. Only time and your own strength will do that." That evening, Mira stood before the mirror in a gown of deep sapphire silk that the royal seamstresses had somehow altered to fit her perfectly. The colour brought out her dark hair and made her skin glow, but she still felt like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. The dining hall was massive, easily accommodating the 50 noble families who had remained in the capital after the disrupted selection ceremony. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over elaborately set tables, and the scent of roasted meats and exotic spices filled the air. Every conversation stopped when she entered on Kieran's arm. She felt their stares like physical weight, heard the whispered speculations that followed in their wake. "Servant girl? Where did she come from? How inappropriate." But Kieran's presence beside her was steady and warm, his hand firm on her arm as he guided her to the high table. "Breathe," he murmured so quietly only she could hear. "You belong here." Lady Cassandra sat 3 tables away, resplendent in emerald green, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style that probably took hours to achieve. When their eyes met, the lady's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. The meal began with little ceremony. Kieran made a brief speech welcoming the assembled nobles and introducing Mira as his chosen mate, but he kept the words simple and direct. Still, she felt every gaze assessing her, judging her worthiness for a role she'd never sought. She was picking at her food, stomach too twisted with nerves to manage more than a few bites, when Lady Cassandra rose gracefully from her seat. "Your Majesty," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the hall, "might I offer a toast to your unique choice?" The room fell silent. Kieran's hand found Mira's under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in warning or comfort. She wasn't sure which. "Of course, Lady Cassandra," he replied, though his tone carried an edge that made Mira's skin prickle. Cassandra raised her crystal goblet, her smile never wavering. "To the future queen, may she grow into her unexpected role." The pause was deliberate, weighted with meaning. After all, it must be quite overwhelming to go from serving in these halls to ruling them. I do hope she remembers where she came from." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through some of the tables. Mira felt heat flood her face, shame and anger warring in her chest. The golden bond pulsed with something darker now, responding to Kieran's barely leashed fury. "Indeed," he said, rising slowly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Mira does remember where she came from. She remembers working harder than most people in this room have ever worked. She remembers earning every scrap of food, every moment of shelter. She remembers what it means to serve others before yourself. His golden eyes swept the assembled nobles, and several shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "What she's learning now," he continued, his voice deadly quiet, "is what it means to be served, what it means to be valued not for your bloodline or your family's wealth, but for who you are, for the strength of your character and the goodness of your heart." He turned that burning gaze on Lady Cassandra, who had gone slightly pale. "She is mine," he said simply, "chosen above all others, including those who believe their birth grants them superiority over others. Anyone who questions that choice questions me. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects their king." The silence that followed was absolute. Mira could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel the bond blazing between them like a living flame. "Furthermore," Kieran continued, "Lady Cassandra, your family's trade agreements with the eastern provinces are due for renewal next month. I do hope your tongue doesn't make those negotiations complicated." Cassandra sank back into her seat, her face flushed with humiliation. But the victory felt hollow to Mira. Yes, he had defended her, claimed her publicly as his own. But she'd seen the looks that passed between the nobles, the way they glanced at each other when they thought she wasn't watching. She was still the servant girl who didn't belong, only now she had a powerful protector. That night she stood at her chamber windows, staring out at gardens shrouded in darkness. The formal gown lay discarded on her bed, replaced by a simple white nightdress that felt more like herself. She should stay. She knew that. The bond was real, and Kieran's feelings for her seemed genuine. But every instinct she'd developed over years of survival screamed at her to run before she ruined everything. The soft sound of her door opening made her turn. Kieran stood in the doorway, still in his formal clothes, but with his jacket removed and his shirt open at the throat. He looked tired, older than his 30 years. "You're thinking about leaving," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be what you need me to be." "What do you think I need you to be?" "Perfect, graceful, someone who doesn't embarrass you in front of your nobles." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Mira, do you know what I was doing before the guards brought you to me?" She shook her head. "I was watching you work. I'd been doing it for weeks, though you never noticed. You were so focused on your tasks, so determined to do them well, even though no one would have cared if you'd done them poorly. You helped an elderly cook carry heavy pots when you thought no one was looking. You gave your own lunch to a stable boy who'd been punished and sent to work without food." Her breath caught. She hadn't known anyone had seen those moments. "That's who you are," he said, moving closer. "Not the gown or the title or the politics. You're the woman who sees suffering and tries to ease it, even when you have nothing to give. But tonight you held your head high while someone tried to humiliate you in front of 50 witnesses. Tonight you let me defend you instead of running away immediately afterward. Tonight you're still here, fighting your fear instead of surrendering to it." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "What would make you stay?" he asked softly, echoing his words from that first night. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never had anything worth staying for before." "Then let me ask you this." His hands came up to frame her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "When you think about leaving, where would you go?" She opened her mouth to answer, then realized she had no answer. The servants' quarters held nothing but memories of emptiness. She had no family, no friends, no place in the world that had ever felt like home. "I've never belonged anywhere," she whispered. "You belong here," he said firmly, "with me. Not because I'm a king, but because my soul knows yours, because when I hold you, every restless thing in me goes quiet." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and the golden bond flared so bright she gasped. "One more day," he murmured. "Can you give me one more day?" She stared up into those amber eyes that saw too much, felt the pull of the impossible connection between them, and made a choice that terrified her. "One more day," she whispered, and when he kissed her, soft and careful and achingly gentle, she finally understood what the servants meant when they whispered about magic. The days that followed were a whirlwind of stolen moments and growing trust. Kieran kept his word, patient as stone, while Mira slowly learned to believe she might actually deserve the impossible life she'd stumbled into. One day became 3, became 7, became 2 weeks of morning walks in the garden and evening conversations by the fireplace. She was beginning to think she might truly belong here when everything shattered. The royal gathering was meant to be a celebration, a formal presentation of the future queen to visiting dignitaries from neighbouring kingdoms. The great hall sparkled with hundreds of candles, and nobles mingled in their finest attire, wine flowing freely as musicians played from the gallery above. Mira stood beside Kieran's throne, wearing a gown of midnight blue that made her feel almost like she belonged in this glittering world. The past 2 weeks had given her a fragile confidence, enough to smile and nod as foreign ambassadors were presented to her. "You're beautiful," Kieran murmured, during a lull between introductions, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. The golden warmth flared in her chest, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You're required to say that." "No," he said seriously. "I'm required to do many things as king. Telling my mate she's beautiful isn't one of them." Before she could respond, a commotion near the hall's entrance caught their attention. Raised voices, the sound of something being dropped, a woman's laugh that cut through the pleasant murmur of conversation like a blade. Lady Cassandra stood near the refreshment tables, surrounded by a small group of nobles. In her hands was an ornate silver goblet, and her smile was sharp as winter wind. "Your Majesty," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the hall, "I've prepared a special toast in honour of your charming mate." Something cold settled in Mira's stomach. Kieran's hand found hers, his fingers tightening in warning. "How thoughtful," he replied, though his tone suggested anything but appreciation. "Oh, but first," Cassandra continued, producing a small crystal vial from her sleeve, "I thought perhaps our future queen might enjoy a traditional ceremonial wine. It's a very old custom dating back centuries, a symbol of purity and worthiness." The hall had gone quiet, conversations dying as nobles turned to watch the exchange. Mira felt their stares like physical weight, the familiar shame rising in her throat. "That's unnecessary," Kieran said firmly. "But your Majesty," Cassandra's voice was silk over steel, "surely your mate wouldn't refuse such an honour, unless, of course, she has something to hide." The challenge was clear, public, designed to force Mira into a position where refusing would seem like an admission of unworthiness, while accepting would subject her to whatever poison Cassandra had prepared. "I don't understand the ceremony," Mira said carefully, stepping forward. "Perhaps you could explain—" "Oh, it's quite simple," Cassandra interrupted, pouring the contents of the vial into the goblet. The liquid swirled an unnatural shade of deep purple. "The wine reveals truth. If the drinker is pure of heart and worthy of their position, they'll feel only warmth and joy. But if they're unsuitable, well." Her smile turned predatory. "The reaction can be quite dramatic." Kieran moved to intercede, but Mira touched his arm, stopping him. She understood now. This was a test, publicly orchestrated to humiliate her in front of witnesses from across the realm. If she refused, she would be branded a coward. If she accepted, and the wine was poisoned or drugged, her reaction would be taken as proof of her unworthiness. "How fascinating," she said quietly, accepting the goblet from Cassandra's hands. "And this ceremony is binding, legally recognized?" "Of course," Cassandra practically purred, "by the oldest laws of the realm." "Then you won't mind drinking first, will you?" Mira asked pleasantly. "To demonstrate the proper technique?" Cassandra's smile faltered. "That's not how the ceremony works." "Strange," Mira continued, her voice growing stronger, "because if this wine is truly ceremonial, surely there's no harm in you taking the first sip, unless you have something to hide." The hall held its breath. Cassandra's face had gone pale, her eyes darting toward the exits as if calculating escape routes. That's when the first scream echoed from the corridors beyond. The massive doors to the great hall burst open, and chaos poured in. Armed figures in black leather and wolf fur, faces painted with ceremonial war markings, flooded the space. The Shadow Fang pack had come calling. "Protect the king!" someone shouted, but the attackers weren't moving toward Kieran. They were cutting through the crowd with singular purpose, heading straight for Mira. Kieran's transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment he was a man in royal finery, the next a massive golden wolf with eyes like liquid fire. His clothes shredded as he shifted, and his growl shook the crystal chandeliers overhead. But there were too many of them, and they were prepared. Silver nets flew through the air, designed to trap and weaken shifters. Kieran dodged the first two, but the third caught him across the shoulder, burning into his flesh with a hiss of smoke. Mira dropped the goblet, purple liquid spreading across white marble as she ran toward him. Her mind wasn't thinking clearly, wasn't calculating odds or considering consequences. All she knew was that her mate was hurt, and she would die before she let anyone take him from her. "Stay back!" Kieran's voice was distorted by his wolf form, but the command was clear. She ignored him completely. The first attacker reached her as she was halfway across the hall. He was massive, nearly 7 feet tall, with scars crisscrossing his face and hands that ended in claws. When he lunged for her, something impossible happened. Heat exploded through her body, starting from the golden bond and radiating outward until she felt like her skin was on fire. Her vision sharpened, her hearing became acute, and suddenly she could sense the attacker's movement before he made it. She ducked under his reaching arm and drove her elbow into his ribs with strength she didn't know she possessed. He doubled over, gasping, and she brought her knee up to meet his descending face. "Half-blood," she heard someone snarl behind her. The rumours were true. More attackers converged on her position, but now other things were happening. Royal guards poured into the hall, swords drawn. Noble guests who were secretly shifters began their own transformations, filling the air with snarls and roars. Through it all, Kieran fought like a force of nature, silver burns smoking on his golden coat as he tore through enemy after enemy to reach her. But it was Cassandra who proved to be the real threat. While Mira was fighting off attackers, the lady had moved to the high table where a ceremonial dagger lay among the formal place settings. When Mira finally broke free of her opponents, it was to find Cassandra standing behind her with the blade pressed to her own throat. "How poetic!" Cassandra called out, her voice cutting through the sounds of battle. The servant girl who thought she could be queen, about to watch her mate die because of her presumption. Mira turned to see Kieran surrounded by 6 attackers, silver chains wrapped around his legs and torso, holding him in place. He was bleeding from multiple wounds, his strength fading from the silver poisoning. "Let him go," Mira said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Oh, I don't think so," Cassandra laughed. "You see, the Shadowfang pack has made me a very interesting offer. They want to weaken the king, and what better way than to take his precious mate? But first, they want to prove that you're exactly what everyone knows you are, a nobody who brings nothing but destruction to those around her." The blade pressed deeper, and a thin line of blood appeared on Cassandra's throat. "Choose," she continued. "Come with us willingly, and your mate lives. Refuse, and watch him die slowly while you're dragged away anyway. Mira felt the golden bond pulsing desperately, Kieran's pain and fury washing through her like a tide. She could hear his laboured breathing, could sense his wolf fighting against the silver with everything he had left. "You're right," she said quietly, taking a step toward Cassandra. "I am nobody." Cassandra's smile widened in triumph. "Then I'm nobody special," Mira continued, taking another step. "Nobody important, nobody powerful." "Finally," Cassandra breathed, "some honesty." "But you made one mistake," Mira said, and her voice carried clearly through the suddenly quiet hall. "You assumed that being nobody meant I had nothing to lose." She moved faster than human speed should have allowed, the half-blood heritage that had been dormant for so long finally awakening completely. Her hand closed around Cassandra's wrist, squeezing until bones ground together and the dagger fell to the floor with a metallic ring. "Touch my mate again," she said conversationally, "and I'll show you exactly what nobody is capable of." The sound that tore from Kieran's throat was pure alpha dominance, a roar that shattered windows and sent every enemy wolf in the hall to their knees in submission. The silver chains that had held him burst apart like paper as his wolf called on reserves of strength that should have been impossible. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a reckoning. Kieran moved through the remaining attackers like death itself, golden fur streaked with silver burns, but his fury undiminished. When the last Shadowfang warrior fell, he shifted back to human form and stood naked and magnificent in the centre of the destroyed hall. His golden eyes found hers across the carnage, and the intensity in them stole her breath. "Mine," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the great hall. "She is mine, chosen above all others. She is my mate, my queen, my everything. Anyone who harms her answers to me. Anyone who questions her worth questions their king." He strode through the debris and blood, past cowering nobles and fallen enemies, until he reached her. When his arms closed around her, the golden bond blazed so bright she could see it behind her closed eyelids. "I was so afraid," she whispered against his chest. "Never again," he promised, his lips against her hair. "You'll never have to be afraid again." Around them, the hall slowly came back to life. Guards secured prisoners, servants began cleaning up the destruction, and nobles whispered among themselves about what they had witnessed. But Mira heard none of it. All she could hear was the steady beat of Kieran's heart beneath her cheek. All she could feel was the unshakable certainty that she had found her home at last. "Still think you're nobody?" he asked softly. She pulled back to meet his eyes, seeing her own reflection in their golden depths. "No," she said firmly. "I'm everything. You taught me that." And when he kissed her there in the ruins of the great hall, with witnesses and enemies and allies all watching, Mira finally understood the difference between being chosen and choosing to belong. The weeks that followed were a strange kind of healing. The great hall had been restored, its marble floors scrubbed clean of blood, and its windows replaced with new glass that caught the morning light in rainbow patterns. But the real transformation wasn't in the castle's stone and mortar. It was in the woman who walked those corridors with her head held high, no longer shrinking from the gazes that followed her. Mira stood in what had once been the servants' quarters, watching as carpenters installed shelves and painters applied cheerful yellow walls. The space would become a school, a place where children who had never expected to learn their letters would discover the magic of books. "The reading primer arrived from the capital," Kieran said behind her, his arms coming around her waist as he spoke against her ear. 50 copies, just as you requested." She leaned back against his chest, marvelling at how natural this had become. 3 weeks since the attack, 3 weeks of learning to accept that she was truly safe, truly chosen, truly home. "Mrs. Harwick from the kitchens wants to teach cooking alongside the reading," she said, covering his hands with hers. "She thinks the children should learn practical skills too." Brilliant woman, Mrs. Harwick, almost as brilliant as her future queen. Future queen. The words still sent a thrill through her, though she'd stopped flinching when he said them. "The council meeting this morning," she said, turning in his arms. Lord Chancellor Aldrich seemed pleased with the education proposal. Kieran's smile was wry. Aldrich has discovered that a queen who genuinely cares about the people is remarkably good for kingdom morale. Tax collection is up, trade disputes are down, and visiting dignitaries keep commenting on how refreshed the court seems. Because they're not all scheming against each other for your attention anymore? Because they're too busy trying to impress you. His golden eyes grew serious. You've changed this place, Mira, made it better. Before she could respond, rapid footsteps echoed in the hallway. A young page appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "Your Majesty, my lady, forgive the interruption. There's someone at the gates requesting an audience." "Who?" Kieran's voice sharpened with protective instinct. "Master Edwin Blackheart, my lady. He says he employed you before your selection." Ice settled in Mira's stomach. Edwin Blackheart, the castle's former head steward, the man who had made her life a misery for 3 years, who had taken every opportunity to remind her of her worthless place in the world. "Shall I have him turned away?" Kieran asked quietly. Mira took a deep breath, feeling the golden bond pulse with his protective fury. A month ago she would have hidden, would have begged him to send the man away, so she wouldn't have to face those cruel eyes again. "No," she said firmly, "I'll see him." "Mira, in the throne room," she continued, "officially, as your queen." Pride blazed in Kieran's expression. "As you wish, but I'll be with you." "I wouldn't expect anything else." An hour later, Mira sat beside Kieran on the twin thrones that had been installed after their mating bond was complete. She wore a gown of deep forest green that made her feel regal and powerful, her hair arranged in the intricate braids that had become her signature style. At her throat gleamed the royal mating necklace, an ancient piece of amber and gold that marked her as the Alpha King's chosen mate. The throne room doors opened, and Edwin Blackheart shuffled in. He was smaller than she remembered, greyer. The cruel confidence that had once made him seem towering and terrible was gone, replaced by a desperate anxiety that made him appear exactly what he was, a middle-aged man who had built his self-worth on making others feel worthless. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low before the thrones. When he straightened, his eyes found Mira's, and she saw the shock there. This wasn't the cowering servant girl he remembered. "Master Blackheart," Kieran said coolly, "state your business." "I've come to congratulate Her Majesty on her extraordinary good fortune," Edwin stammered, "and to offer my continued service to the crown." "How thoughtful," Mira said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "Tell me, Master Blackheart, what service exactly are you offering?" Whatever your Majesty requires. I know the castle well. I understand the complexities of managing staff." "You understand the complexities of exploitation," she corrected gently, "of taking a grieving 14-year-old girl and convincing her that working 16-hour days for scraps was a kindness." Edwin's face went pale. "Your Majesty, I provided shelter, employment." "You provided cruelty." Mira stood from her throne, and the movement was fluid, commanding. "You told a child that she was worthless, that she should be grateful for abuse, that she would never be anything more than the floors she scrubbed." She descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing in the silent chamber. "Do you remember what you said to me the day my mother died, Master Blackheart?" Edwin's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. "You said that now I would learn what it meant to earn my keep, that charity time was over, and I would work for every scrap of bread, every moment of shelter. You said I was nothing but a burden on the Crown's resources." She stopped 3 feet away from him, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. "You were wrong. Your Majesty, please, I was only trying to teach discipline. You were trying to break a child's spirit so thoroughly that she would never question her place." Mira's voice remained calm, but it carried an authority that made Edwin shrink back. "You succeeded for 3 years. I did believe I was nothing." Kieran had risen from his throne as well, moving to stand beside her with predatory grace. "But you made a mistake," Mira continued. "You taught me to work hard, to endure, to keep going even when everything inside me wanted to give up. Those aren't the qualities of nothing, Master Blackheart. Those are the qualities of everything. I was young, inexperienced in management. You were cruel." Her voice cut through his excuses like a blade. "And now you want to profit from the strength you tried so hard to destroy." Edwin fell to his knees. "Please, your Majesty, I have nowhere else to go. The other noble houses won't employ me after word spread about your elevation. I've lost everything." Mira looked down at him, this man who had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable. She felt Kieran's presence beside her, felt the bond humming with his readiness to have Edwin removed permanently if she said the word. "Stand up," she said quietly. Edwin struggled to his feet, confusion and hope warring in his expression. "I'm going to offer you a choice," she continued. "The same choice you offered a grieving child, but with one crucial difference. I'm going to be honest about what I'm offering." She clasped her hands behind her back, every inch the queen she'd learned to become. "You can work in the castle kitchens, not as head cook, not in management, as an assistant. You'll scrub pots, haul water and clean floors, 16-hour days, minimal pay, a cot in the servants' quarters. Exactly the life you designed for me." Edwin's face crumpled. "The difference," Mira said, "is that I'm telling you honestly what that life contains. I won't lie to you about kindness when I'm offering cruelty. You'll have food and shelter, but you'll earn every scrap of it. And you'll do it knowing that the girl you tried to break is the one offering you mercy. And if I refuse, then you're free to go. I won't have you arrested or blacklisted. You can try to build a life somewhere else, the same way you expected me to be grateful for the life you built for me." Edwin stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him calculating. Kitchen work versus the unknown. Pride versus survival. "I accept," he whispered. "Then report to Mrs. Harwick in the kitchens. She'll explain your duties." Mira turned to go, then paused. "Master Blackheart." "Yes, Your Majesty." "If I hear that you've treated any of the kitchen staff the way you treated me, you'll discover that queens have considerably more options for dealing with cruelty than servant girls do." After Edwin was escorted away, Mira found herself back in the former servants' quarters, sitting on the window ledge that overlooked the gardens. The space felt different now, not haunted by old pain, but transformed into something new. "Regrets?" Kieran asked, settling beside her. "No." She was surprised to find she meant it. 3 years ago, I would have dreamed of having him at my mercy. I thought I'd want to see him suffer the way he made me suffer. And now? Now I just want him to understand. Maybe if he spends enough time in that kitchen, he'll remember what it feels like to be powerless. Maybe he'll learn to be kinder. And if he doesn't," Mira smiled, "then Mrs. Harwick will handle him. Have you seen that woman with a rolling pin when she's angry?" Kieran's laughter filled the empty room. "Remind me never to get on Mrs. Harwick's bad side." "Too late for that. She's already decided you don't eat enough vegetables." Terrifying. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over gardens where Mira now walked freely, instead of cleaning up after others who enjoyed them. It struck her how much had changed, not just in her circumstances, but in her understanding of herself. "I used to dream about this," she said quietly, "about having your own rooms, a title, about belonging somewhere." She turned to look at him, this impossible man who had seen worth where she'd learned to see only shame. "I used to watch noble families during ceremonies and wonder what it would feel like to have someone choose you, not out of obligation or convenience, but because they genuinely wanted you in their life. And now you know. Now I know it feels like coming home to a place you've never been before." She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "It feels like the golden thread that connects us was always there, and I just needed to stop running long enough to feel it pulling me toward where I belong." "The thread isn't going anywhere," he said softly, "and neither are we." That night, as they walked through corridors that had once been forbidden to her, Mira realized that her transformation was complete, not because she'd learned to wear gowns or manage noble politics or speak with authority, but because she'd learned to believe in the deepest part of herself that she was worthy of love. The servant girl who had once scrubbed these floors in shame was gone, not erased, but evolved into someone who could show mercy to her tormentor and build schools for forgotten children. Someone who could stand beside an Alpha King, not as his trophy or his charity case, but as his equal. Someone who had learned that being everything had never been about what others saw when they looked at her. It had always been about what she chose to see when she looked at herself. 1 year later, Mira stood on the castle balcony watching the Kingdom Day celebration unfold in the courtyard below. Hundreds of families had gathered for the festival, their laughter and music drifting up on the warm spring air. Children ran between stalls selling honey cakes and painted ribbons, while couples danced to melodies played by travelling musicians. It was everything she'd once watched from windows while scrubbing floors, never imagining she would someday be the reason for the celebration. "The people seem happy," Kieran said, joining her at the stone railing. His arm came around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing, and she leaned into his warmth. "Mrs. Harwick says the feast preparations are nearly complete. She's made enough honey cakes to feed half the kingdom." Mira smiled, watching a group of children from her school chase each other through the crowd, their faces bright with joy. "She also threatened to box my ears if I don't eat more at dinner. Wise woman, you're eating for 2 now." The reminder sent a flutter of wonder through her chest. 2 months along, and she still couldn't quite believe it. A child, their child, the future heir to a kingdom she'd never imagined she'd belong to. "Have I told you today that I love you?" Kieran asked, his voice soft against her ear. "Oh, only twice." She turned in his arms, marvelling at how easy this had become. "But I don't mind hearing it again." "I love you," he said solemnly, golden eyes bright with the same wonder she felt. "I love your courage, your kindness, your stubborn refusal to believe you don't deserve good things." "I love you too," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "Even when you leave your books scattered across every surface in our chambers." "That's a very specific complaint." "That's because it happened this morning. Again." His laughter rumbled against her chest as he pulled her closer. Below them the celebration continued, but Mira's attention was caught by a familiar figure moving through the crowd. A young woman in a simple blue dress carrying a tray of fresh bread from the castle kitchens. "Is that Sarah?" she asked, following the girl with her gaze. "The new kitchen assistant?" "Yes, Mrs. Harwick says she's settling in well." Sarah was 16, the same age Mira had been when she'd first arrived at the castle. The same age she'd been when Edwin Blackheart had made it clear that she was nothing more than a burden to be tolerated. But Sarah moved through the crowd with confidence, accepting compliments on the bread with genuine smiles, clearly comfortable in her position. "It's different now," Mira said quietly. "What's different?" "Everything. The way servants are treated, the way children like Sarah are welcomed instead of just used." She watched as Sarah stopped to help an elderly woman carry her purchases, the simple kindness unmarked but noticed. A year ago, that girl would have been invisible. Now she's part of the community. "You changed that." "We changed it." She looked up at him seriously. "You could have chosen any of those noble daughters, someone who already knew how to be a queen, who came with political alliances and dowries." "I could have," he agreed, "but my wolf knew better. He chose the woman who would heal this kingdom from the inside out, who would remember what it felt like to be powerless and use her position to lift others up." Before she could respond, a new voice interrupted them from the balcony doorway. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion." They turned to find Lord Chancellor Aldrich approaching with a scroll in his hands and barely contained excitement on his usually composed face. "What is it, Aldrich?" Kieran asked. "News from the Southern Territories, Your Majesty. The education programme Her Majesty established has been so successful that 3 neighbouring kingdoms have requested permission to implement similar systems." Aldrich's smile was genuine as he bowed to Mira. "It seems your influence extends far beyond our borders, my lady." 3 kingdoms, schools for children who had never expected to learn, opportunities for servants to advance beyond their birth stations, hope spreading like ripples across water. "Thank you for bringing the news personally," Mira said. After Aldrich departed, she and Kieran stood in comfortable silence, watching their people celebrate below. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded her of the warm glow she'd first felt when their eyes met in the throne room. "Do you ever think about that day," she asked, "when the guards brought me to you by mistake?" "Every day," he said immediately, "but I don't think it was a mistake." "No? I think it was fate finally getting tired of my stubborn refusal to look for you in the right places." His arms tightened around her. "I spent years convinced my mate would be someone obvious, a noble daughter, someone trained for royal life, someone who fit perfectly into the world I knew. Instead, you got a servant girl who didn't even know she was part wolf." "Instead, I got everything I didn't know I needed." He turned her to face him fully, golden eyes serious. "I got someone who would challenge me to be better, who would see the people I'd overlooked, who would turn duty into love and obligation into joy. And I got someone who saw worth where I'd learned to see only shame." She placed her hand over his heart, feeling its steady rhythm. "Who taught me that being everything doesn't mean being perfect? What does it mean? It means being chosen, not for what you can give or what you represent, but for who you are when everything else is stripped away." She smiled. "It means finding home in someone else's heart." The sound of music drifted up from the courtyard, and Kieran extended his hand with a slight bow. "My lady, would you honour me with a dance? Here? There's no music up here except there's always music when I'm with you." She took his hand, letting him pull her into the simple steps of a country dance she'd learned watching from servants' windows. They moved slowly across the stone balcony, the setting sun casting their shadows long across the space where she'd once stood, believing she'd never belong. "I have something to tell you," Kieran said as they swayed together. "If it's about the baby, I already know I need to eat more vegetables. Mrs. Harwick was very clear." "No, though I agree with Mrs. Harwick." His smile was soft, private. "I wanted you to know that I knew." "Knew what?" "That first day when the guards brought you to the throne room, I knew before our eyes even met." Mira stopped dancing. "How could you possibly have known?" "I'd been watching you for weeks, remember? Every morning when you scrubbed the throne room, I would find excuses to pass through. My wolf was drawn to you long before I understood why." His hand cupped her face gently. "The moment you walked through those doors, covered in soapy water and believing you didn't belong, I knew you were mine." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you needed to choose it too. The bond is only complete when both halves accept it willingly." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You needed to believe you were worthy before you could believe you were everything to me. And if I hadn't, if I'd kept running, then I would have waited. However long it took, I would have waited." The words hung in the air between them, waited with a year's worth of patient love and gentle persistence. Mira thought about the frightened girl who had knelt on throne-room marble, convinced she was nobody. That girl seemed like a lifetime ago, though she lived on in the compassion Mira showed to servants and the fierce protectiveness she felt for anyone society deemed worthless. "I'm glad I stopped running," she said finally. "So am I." The last light of sunset faded into deep blue twilight, and stars began to appear overhead. In the courtyard below, lanterns were being lit for the evening portion of the celebration, casting warm pools of light across the faces of people who were no longer her betters but her people. "Ready to go down?" Kieran asked. "Mrs. Harwick will have our heads if we're late for the feast." "In a moment." Mira turned back to the railing, looking out over the kingdom that had become her home. "I want to remember this, all of it. The celebration, the feeling, standing here with you, carrying our child, knowing that tomorrow there will be more children learning to read in schools we built, more families with hope they didn't have before." She leaned back against his chest. "I want to remember what it feels like to be everything to someone and to know that I'll still be everything tomorrow." "Always," he promised, his lips against her hair. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were my destiny, not because you were born to it, but because you chose to become it." As they finally made their way downstairs to join the feast, Mira caught a glimpse of their reflection in the tall windows lining the corridor, a king and queen moving together through their castle, her hand resting on the small curve of her belly, his arm protective around her shoulders. She barely recognized the woman in that reflection. This queen who carried herself with quiet confidence, who wore her crown as naturally as she'd once worn servants' rags, who looked at the future with hope instead of fear. But then again, she supposed that was the point. The servant girl who had scrubbed these floors wasn't gone. She lived on in every kindness, every reform, every moment when Queen Mira remembered what it felt like to be powerless and chose to use her strength to lift others. She had learned finally and completely that being everything didn't mean forgetting where you came from. It meant using that knowledge to build something better. Where are you listening from tonight? I love hearing from fellow romance lovers in the comments below. If these stories of fated love and healing bring you joy, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people discover these tales of finding home in unexpected places. Until our next story, remember, you are everything to the right person, and that person is out there looking for you with the same desperation you feel searching for them.